Your eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with MicroMicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and MicroMicelle technology.
Do your patients know what presbyopia is?
There are people who are afraid of the press.
Have you talked to your patients about multifocal contact lenses?
I've heard the bifocal, but not multifocal.
Exactly, not multifocal.
Do you need help with your multifocal strategy? Learn more at the conclusion of this episode. With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MiSight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you. Omega-3s is a very highly studied drug in medicine. I've seen places where it's approximately the 5th most studied drug in medicine. And it gets kind of confusing because there's an alphabet soup to essential fatty acids. So let's start off with omega-3s and the different types of omega-3s, EPA, DHA, ALA. So if you could give us a little insight on that.
Absolutely. Carrie, first of all, thank you for having me here. And it's through a series of research and evidence that we've reached this level of knowledge. I started getting into the area of omegas because of my PhD. Even though it wasn't focused on omegas, it was focused on carotenoids for as micronutrients for metabolism, particularly eye function. I realized how important the addition of omegas into our diets and into our wellness they are for human function. So omegas, like you said before, are a certain type of fatty acids, and they are exclusive because we cannot produce them. They have something that is called a double bond, so that's why they're unsaturated compared to saturated fats. So very generic and very briefly, you have 2 different types of fats, the saturated, which we all know are bad for you, like butter and those kind of very solid fats, versus unsaturated fats. And that's where the omegas come in. They're called omegas because they bend into this omega shape of the Greek letter. And they have double bonds, which by definition that makes them called unsaturated. And depending on the place where the double bond is, you have then omega-3, which occurs in the 3rd carbon, omega-6, which occurs in the 6th carbon, and omega-9, which occurs in the 9th carbon. Omega-3s and omega-6 are very important for us. They're essential polyunsaturated fatty acids, but particularly omega-3s are very relevant because we don't get enough of them throughout our diets.
So tell me about ALA. What is ALA? And then we'll get into DHA and EPA.
ALA is alpha linoleic acid. It's a very common fatty acid in our diet. It's very abundant in seeds, particularly flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, and that's why they're in this new era of this trendy nutrition for getting into more seeds is so important. And it's a very important molecule because from there, the body can then form the next 2 molecules, which are the other 2 very important omega-3s, EPA and DHA, eicosapentaenoic acid for EPA and docosapentaenoic acid for DHA. So they are in the same metabolism of fatty acids. The first molecule to appear is ALA, and that's why it's so important. And then the body can break it down and keep adding elongating the molecule to become a very long chain, and then into an EPA molecule, and further down the series of metabolisms into DHA.
So ALA is mostly from plants, and only a small amount can be converted to DHA and EPA, maybe 5%. Is that correct?
Correct. So that's another key here, and why omega-3s, particularly EPA and DHA, become so relevant. Even though the organism, our organism, or human beings, are able to convert ALA into the other two molecules that are relevant, the process is not efficient enough, and it's not enough. So we don't get enough ALA to transform it all into DHA and EPA, even though we do get enough amounts throughout our diet. The process is not efficient enough to convert into enough concentrations, circulating concentrations, for our body to metabolize and use DHA and EPA.
And we do use ALA, and we use it for energy. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, see, the thing with fatty acids is that the key of life is thanks to fatty acids, and that's the development or the creation of the cell membrane. Thanks to that compartmentalization is why life happens. And cell membranes are made of fatty acids, they are made of lipids. And when you have a cell membrane with embedded omega-3s, it allows it to be more flexible. It allows it to have more structure and fight oxidation and other processes in a better form than if it didn't have it. So ALA, DHA, and EPA are everywhere in our body. They are highly concentrated in areas with higher metabolic rates, for example, the brain or the heart, and hence probably we'll eventually start talking about health claims and why they are important for us. But the biological rationale physiologically is because they are highly deposited in these very important organs to produce function throughout high metabolic rates, particularly, for example, the brain, where they are highly concentrated to protect the nerves and the neurons and the cells that protect the neurons. So ALA is present as well in all these different organs.
When people talk about testosterone, they're gonna think of you and for being such a pioneer and being so brave to be able to give testosterone to men who are suffering, because men are suffering out there that have lack of testosterone. And it's estimated about 20 million men, it's probably a lot more than that, and 90%, 20 million men that are deficient in testosterone, and 90% of them don't even know it. So why is it when people go into the doctor for routine labs, they don't test for testosterone generally? But I've noticed lately a little bit more of an uptick on general physicians, PCPs, now testing for testosterone. You could talk a little bit about that. And I always thought, insulin is the most important test that doctors aren't testing for, the most important labs. But I think it's probably testosterone. If you could talk about that.
Well, I agree with you, Kerry. I actually, we're not limited to just testing for one thing for people, but I would say that certainly for men, if you had to pick one blood test that would give you the most information about a person's health status, that blood test is testosterone. And the reason I say that is because, as you point out, testosterone deficiency is common. It causes a whole variety of symptoms where some people can be miserable. Some people may have milder symptoms, but as we get older, our levels go down and guys don't feel right. And the amazing thing is we now have level 1 evidence. We have the highest quality evidence that testosterone is very important and associated with some of the most important health issues that we deal with in this country, obesity, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, anemia, dementia they have data on, and frankly, even mortality. We have what are called meta-analyses, which are studies of studies, you know, where the researchers take all the studies in a certain area, they put them all together and they combine the data and they look at it. And it's considered the highest level of evidence. It's called a meta-analysis. And those show that men who have low levels of testosterone die sooner than men who have normal levels of testosterone. If that doesn't wake people up, I don't know what would. But you know what you're saying, you hit upon something that is very important and sort of near and dear to my heart, which is that there is an amazing resistance or lack of acceptance in sort of the mainstream medical community for even testing testosterone, let alone treating it. And it's shocking to me. I am a mainstream medical doctor. I trained at Harvard all the way through, Harvard College, Harvard Medical School, Harvard residency. I've been on the faculty of Harvard for over 30 years. I published scientific articles. I've done randomized control trials, epidemiologic studies, diurnal studies where we follow people, whatever. And the data, not just me, of course, but there are investigators worldwide where the wealth of information around testosterone and its importance for health is unarguable. It's powerful. And yet, most medical doctors are told that testosterone, it's not important to test for it. Testosterone deficiency is just a normal part of aging. Often they're told, and they think that testosterone therapy is fringe medicine. And of course, it's nothing of the sort. And I'm convinced that part of the problem is that testosterone has a bad rap. Everybody thinks that they know something about testosterone, you know, and not just doctors, but lay people too, because we use it in colloquial language. You know, when something happens on the stock market, they say the traders were in a testosterone frenzy, right? No, they weren't. They were in a frenzy, but it had nothing to do with testosterone. They say every kind of bad behavior that males are supposed to exhibit, toxic masculinity, is tied into testosterone. It's a stand-in, I think, in sort of our social discussions as it's a stand-in for maleness. And although it's true that men have more testosterone than women by a factor of about 10, you know, testosterone actually has really important effects in women too. And women can be deficient in testosterone, usually after menopause. And testosterone therapy is, I was part of a white paper with a really august group of investigators last year, of a white paper that was published in several journals about the use of testosterone therapy in women. I'm sorry, it's effective, it's safe, and that's a whole other story, but also not used very much. And I'm convinced, and you know, in medical circles, we've thought for years that it caused prostate cancer. That was the reason it was sort of held off. And then more recently, there was a scare story in 2013. There was an article published in the Journal of the American Medical Association that got enormous attention in the media, enormous. That testosterone therapy seemed to increase the risks of heart attack, strokes, and death. There were a lot of problems with that paper, and 29 medical societies petitioned JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, to retract the article because there were some serious problems with it. They didn't. But that news around that is really what penetrated the average doctor's mind. That was the one headline they know about testosterone. And all the subsequent data has shown that data was incorrect. And if anything, testosterone looks like it may be beneficial in terms of heart attack, strokes, and death. But so testosterone has a bad rap. And I've been convinced for years that if testosterone came out as a new molecule or a new drug today, and it had a different name that nobody was familiar with. Product 123 ABC. And it got a trade name like, I don't know, Dr. Kelp. That drug, with the studies that are behind it, would be touted as the most important medical advance of the last 20 years, because the number of items that it helps with in terms of health and the safety and its effectiveness is just so impressive.
One of the ways to get better is to compete against older kids, so you can see faster pitching and better bat speed and the ball coming off the ball a little bit faster if you're in the field.
Well, I think if we look at high school curriculum or college curriculum, you know, anything that we do as learners at younger ages, and even here as adults, we learn en masse. We learn and we surround ourselves with a group of peers. They're not strictly only age-based learning. I mean, I remember in high school, I'd be a sophomore in Spanish 2, and there'd be seniors in my class. And I think the biggest kind of the narrative that gets pushed is that players will get hurt if they play against older players. And it's never been that way in the history of the sport. You know, a 22-year-old major league pitcher is facing a 34-year-old hitter, you know, and nobody worries about, oh boy, that 22-year-old is going to get hurt. But in baseball, even at older ages, that when I say 13 to 16 or 13 to 18, parents absolutely are deathly afraid of putting a 14-year-old in against a 16 or 17-year-older. But within 1 year, that athlete's going to be asked to compete, which I find amusing, because parents will say, well, my son didn't make varsity baseball as a freshman. Well, he's 15 and he's now competing against 18 and 19-year-olders, and you haven't let him compete against those players. And so there's a reason why he didn't play varsity right away. He has to kind of ramp himself up and kind of get himself prepared. So I find it to be a really disturbing trend within youth athletics because it's a business model. It's not a developmental model.
You know, when we were kids, we'd go outside and play with our friends, and all ages played. Everything now is so structured, and I guess it is because it's become a way of making money.
Well, it's exactly that, Gary. I mean, it is always about business because people figured out very early. And again, when I talk to parents, I say, let's look at the average owner of a indoor facility or a travel organization. They generally are now in their early 40s, but they've been doing it since they were 20 to 25 because they recognized right away that people wanted to spend money not only for lessons, but to be on a team that would allow their son to gain stature and status within the community. But they figured out if I make one team of 10 and 12-year-old, 11 and 12-year-olds, I don't make as much as if I had 3 teams of 20 players paying $2,000 to $4,000 to $6,000 to $8,000 per player. So I make more money with more teams. You know, and parents never quite picked up on that. The name on the jersey might say the All-American Prospects. But, you know, if you're playing on the All-American Prospect blue team or white team or gold team, and it's not the big team, what are you really gaining as far as having that name across your chest? But the business model of travel baseball pushes a narrative of fear. They sell fear to parents. Your son is not going to play at a competitive enough level. He's not going to get a good enough coaching. We're going to provide him with an opportunity to be seen by college coaches. It's not accurate.
MacuHealth, your science-born and tested solutions for visual performance, macular degeneration, and dry eye syndrome. New products coming soon. Embrace the science.
You know, when I went over my introduction from 1865 to now and the increase of these chronic diseases, the first thing people are going to say, well, people are living longer now, so that's why they're getting chronic disease. Can you dispel that myth?
Absolutely. So Many people very mistakenly believe that, they look at a longevity chart or a lifespan graph or chart, and they'll say, well, in 1900, the average American died at 49.6 years or what, I think that's what it is, something like that. And they'll say, so people were just dropping dead by, by 45 and 50. And therefore, they didn't grow old enough to develop coronary heart disease and all these cancers and diabetes and less obesity and macular degeneration, all these disorders. And the reality is that if you look at every single population, every historical book there is, you will never, ever, ever find a population where people were growing old and dying at age 50. The mistake in this thinking comes from the fact that in most of history, children had a very high death rate, and that came from mostly infectious diseases and trauma, and even predation if you look at hunter-gatherers. But for example, in the year 1800, 43.3% of the world's children did not survive to see their 5th birthday. And in 1900, it wasn't much better. In the year 1900, 36.2% of children did not live to see their 5th birthday. And in 1900, there was about 4% of women died in childbirth. So it was 1 to 1.5% per birth. And the average woman gave, I think it was 5 or 6 births. So there was about 4% of women dying in childbirth. So if you put those together, you have an extremely high percentage of the population that's dying at an early age. And so I use the example, I say that, if you took a population of 3, a man who lived to age 80 and his wife who lived to age 70, and their only child died in infancy, the total life lived for that population of 3 is 150 years divided by 3, and that's 50. And that's what was happening. And so, it's, if you look at all of the data, you'll see, and I've posted much of this before, and this is in the book, but you can look at lifespans and you can see that, in fact, people did live as long in the 19th century, as long as they survived childhood. In fact, in some ways, they may have lived longer, but they certainly lived about as long as we do now, in their upper 70s on average, if they survived childhood. And this is the exact same thing we see in hunter-gatherer populations. So Girvan and Kaplan published a paper on that a number of years ago, and they showed that hunter-gatherers, which this is the most brutal life there is, to live out in the open without shelter even, they lived to an average, a modal age of death of 72. So this is if they survived childhood, and the span was much higher. So in other words, in all of history, people have always lived long if they survived childhood.
So how many parts of the world are the people living as hunter-gatherers? Is that common? Or is that getting less and less as the world is becoming more westernized?
Oh yes, there's very few populations that are truly hunter-gatherers today. I don't know if I should try to go through and name them. I wouldn't do a very good job of that, Carrie. But yeah, there's very, very few populations left on the planet that are truly, completely ancestral. I mean, I'll give you some examples. So the Maasai warriors of Kenya and Tanzania, still living ancestral. The Hadza of Kenya. There are possibly some of the Papua New Guineans, the Ashe of Paraguay. There are some Mongolian populations. There's a few scattered populations around the world, but there's not really very many that are still living completely ancestral lives. Meaning they haven't westernized their diets, and they're not, they're not consuming processed foods.
I want to talk about how you got to acceptance faster than most people did. And if you could talk about the different stages of denial, depression, anger, and how losing your sight got you through, help get you through this grieving process a little bit sooner.
Yeah, I think my situation was a bit unique in that I actually was in denial before I started losing my eyesight. I was in denial that I even had an eye disease. Even though I was diagnosed at 3 years old with retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, you see, my parents noticed that I had a hard time seeing in really poorly lit rooms. And so they took me to Duke University Medical Center, and it was there that the doctors diagnosed me with RP. And they told my parents, you should put him in a special school for the blind. But, instead, my parents signed me up for soccer. They thought that was a better way to go about dealing with it. And so I lived my life as normally as one would imagine. I couldn't really do a lot of things in dark areas, but I played sports, played football, played basketball, soccer, baseball, and drove a car, rode a bike, things like that. So I lived a very active lifestyle as a child growing up. And so I think I was really in denial that I had anything in particular going on with my eyes. And that was true up until I started college, and I was in college. I wanted to go into the medical field to help other people. And it's there where my eyesight really began to fade. I started losing the remaining vision that I had during the day. And so that was a tough time for me because, we ask kids all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up? And none of them said they want to be a blind person. So it was then that the depression kicked in. I'd been in denial. Now things were fading out of my eyesight. I couldn't deny it anymore. The game was kind of catching up with me. And so I was in denial. It was a really challenging time. Like I said, I was in the medical field because I wanted to help other people, but now I wasn't even sure if I could help myself. So I switched my major to business, lost about 3 years of university work, went into the business administration field because I thought, I don't even know what I can do, let alone what I want to do as a subset of that. So that was just a challenging time for me. And I think I was probably still in both of those phases, denial and depression. And that continued for a little while. And I had an experience at Leader Dogs for the Blind. So I went there to get my first guide dog. I was 23 years old, and I rolled into campus there in Rochester Hills, Michigan. And I show up on campus, and I'm woe is me, poor me, it's got this unique rare eye disease, feeling really bad for myself, and had a life-changing experience for me there. And it happened because the people there, there were some really incredible people there. Some of the people that I was getting a dog with there in partnership there on the school, some of them had mental impairments on top of being blind. Some of them were on dialysis because they had diabetes that had robbed them of their eyesight. So they had to go get dialysis every week. And some of them were deaf and blind. And despite these unimaginable challenges, well above and beyond what I was going through, these brave souls were getting a guide dog so that they could be independent. Now, look, it's one thing when you just meet someone on the street and hear how rough they have it, but it's another thing altogether when you live with someone and you see those challenges firsthand for an entire month. That experience at Leader Dogs for me was my tipping point. That is what helped get me through the phases of grief and into acceptance. And it's because I realized there at that experience at Leader Dogs, witnessing the living courage displayed by these people, that it can always be worse. No matter how bad your situation is, it can always be worse. And that's when I learned it's one of life's most valuable lessons. And a lot of people think happiness is some feeling that comes over you. And happiness isn't a feeling, and it's not an emotion. It's a decision that you get to make every single day when you wake up. You either choose how you're going to look at things, or you just allow random circumstances to affect your happiness. So the beauty in this is that we all have the power to choose. You have the power to choose your response, and to choose your perspective, and to choose your attitude.
I want to really get into that, but before we do, I just want to give the audience a little background about retinitis pigmentosa.
Sure.
For the people out there, it's I'm an eye doctor, as a hereditary retinal disease, and the most common. About 1 in 4,000 people have it worldwide. And talk about some of the symptoms that you had at the beginning. What were some of the things that you noticed? Loss of peripheral vision, loss of night vision, when you started realizing that you were getting RP or retinitis pigmentosa?
Yeah, for me, it started with nighttime vision. That was the real tough one at first, was the loss of vision in really dark areas. And so there were lots of incidents that let me know that I had a problem. How do you find out what you can't see when you can't see it? Well, the short answer is you run into it. And being a very active young little boy, I ran into it at a high rate of speed. I spent so much time in the emergency room that my parents and me were both questioned separately by hospital staff because they thought they were abusing me. That's how much I was there. And so I would do things like I would fall and, hit my head on an obstacle that I didn't see, like a downspout. One time, we were out on the farm at my grandparents', and there was a water truck there, and I'm running down the driveway at dusk, and I just couldn't see that there was a water truck parked there, and I hit the pipe on the back of the water truck at full speed. And so it was just constant things like that at really close to dark. And then it eventually led into the time frame when the peripheral vision started to fade. And then I started getting more and more of these things called floaters, which are like little dots that kept getting in my way of seeing. I would have to look the floaters away. And eventually the blind spots, like I had these blind spots throughout my field of vision. It started in the peripheral vision, but it ended up going everywhere, all throughout my central vision. So it was a lot like looking through a really, really dense fog. And if you've ever, either had your been in a situation where the fog is so thick, it's really hard to see. That's really what it was like for me when I was in college. The fog really began to roll in.
Shelby, I want to start with you. Your story is so amazing. And before we get into the details of your story, what is in you that you're able to have such a positive attitude going through such a difficult injury?
Yeah, I have always been an athlete, and that competitive drive I've lived with since I was a kid. And after my accident, I told myself I just wanted to be happy and continue being an athlete. And if it wasn't for the High Fives Foundation and knowing that there's adaptive sports out there, I wouldn't have been where I'm at today. And I always tell everyone it's a mindset, and I want to be happy. I want to be an athlete still. And I wake up being in the moment, and I tell myself, what's your mindset? Are you going to be happy? Are you going to be sad? You're going to be depressed? And I just want to be happy. That's all. It's a mindset.
So what is adaptive sports?
Yeah, adaptive sports. There's a whole adaptive sport community. And if you guys know the Paralympics, those are pretty much all the adaptive sports you can think of. And any type of life-altering injury you have, and any type of disability you have an opportunity to participate in adaptive sports. And that's just any equipment and any sport that you think of that you need modifications for, they have that. And I play sled hockey, I mountain bike, I surf, but with adaptive equipment because I'm paralyzed. So there's a whole community of that, and it's been amazing.
Marty, you're a professional athlete as well. Talk about the USA baseball team and the tournament that you're going to be in soon. You both played for Team USA for the women's baseball team. Tell us about that, because the public doesn't know much about it.
Yeah, so the national team it started in 2004, was inaugural year. And if you imagine kind of like what the WBSC was, it's kind of what we do, but for women's baseball. We have all different countries competing for that gold medal. And it's pretty much the most unbelievable thing to be a part of, is playing for your country, representing your country, and being around the best teammates, all these women that have shared the same passion as you, that play the game of baseball around the country, and then all around the world. There's all these other women that love the game just as much as you do.
Your eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology.
Fitting multifocal contact lenses presents a big opportunity to meet patient needs while growing your practice. Alcon is your partner not only with our innovative portfolio, but through e-learning. Learn to enhance your multifocal strategy today with the Alcon Experience Academy.
OIE Broadcasting is the emerging leader in social media. We use scientific entertainment to drive more patients into your office. Visit OIEBroadcasting.com and sign up today.